Okay, good evening to anybody that's joined the East West Rail webinar this evening.
Sorry, John, I've got some housekeeping which I need to get through and I'll hand over to you, okay?
Okay, fine, thanks.
Apologies, not at all. So, good evening and welcome everybody. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to make sure everybody who's joining today can finish logging into this call. I think we're ready to go. Welcome to this East West Railway Company online public event for Bedford. My name is Claire Keith Anderson and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at East West Railway Company. Following the launch of the second round of non-statutory consultation on the 31st of March, this week we're holding the second round of online events or webinars. The focus of this evening's session is on responding to the questions raised by communities to date. For those wanting more detailed dialogue with specialists from the project team, please attend any of our live chat events. There are 2 to 3 sessions per week, 10 in total between now and the end of the consultation. This evening, we will start with a quick run through of what we're consulting on in your area, but the focus of this evening's event is on responding to questions raised to date by yourselves. We are holding similar sessions across the whole route between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to the rest of the team. Joining us today, we also have our Delivery Director for CS2, John Hillman, our Head of Environment, Michael Shanks, our Head of Operations, Maria Cliff, our Development Manager, Stephen Barker, and our Land and Property Manager, Jan Pace. And we have Sian and Caris helping us behind the scenes. Before we start the presentation, I'm going to run through a brief housekeeping and Teams Live note. Many of you might be familiar with Teams Live, but just as a reminder, you'll be on mute throughout. Please note that we're recording these sessions and therefore will not reference any names or descriptions we have been given for GDPR reasons. That's all the housekeeping over with. Now over to you, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. So good evening to everybody that's joined us. My name's John Hillman. I'm the Configuration State 2 Delivery Director for East West Rail, and I'll just be running through the initial opening elements for this evening. So thank you for joining the webinar. This evening we're going to focus on section C, which is the area around Bedford. The webinar is designed to provide information around the public consultation and provide a quick recap on our proposals, particularly for anybody that's joining any of these webinars for the first time. We'll then move through onto the bulk of the event, which is really to provide some answers around some of the key themes and questions that we've been receiving, and hopefully that will answer some people's questions that they've got. In the past, we've obviously held face-to-face consultations as part of the East West Rail journey. We can't do that at the moment, and we would love to speak to people individually. As I said, we've done that previously when we consulted on the central section. We know it isn't possible at the moment. However, it's important that we give people the opportunity to ask their individual questions, and we've got some live chat events, and Claire talked about those, and they're on the slide, the previous slide. But there's opportunity for people to come in and ask their questions and speak to one of our experts if they want a bit more knowledge about that specific question. So we want to use this time tonight to go through some of the themes and some of the general questions that we've seen in the feedback to date in the consultation. However, we also recognise clearly that others and people out there will have specific questions. Again, I would direct you to the live chat. This evening we'll probably use it most of the time in answering the themed questions. So if there is a short time at the end for Q&A, then we can do that through people placing their questions in the chat bar, but we don't expect there'll be much time for that this evening. So if you are seeking that opportunity to ask your question, again, I would stress, please go to the live events where you'll have a greater opportunity to do so. We've already held 6 of these events. We will be holding 10 more all the way through to the end of the consultation. The live chat sessions, again, as I said, are where members of the public can engage with our experts, with people that have been involved in the development of the options that you've seen in the consultation to date, and have the opportunity to discuss in a bit more detail specific concerns. If you can't attend the live chat events, you can still email us on contact@eastwestrail.co.uk. We'll reply to you as soon as possible. So while that's where we can get answers to specific individual questions, we endeavour to cover some of the key issues we've heard, and we'll cover those today. We'll continue to keep the Q&A function open, like I said, and if there's opportunity at the end, we can pick some of those questions up. There are a number of reasons why, excuse me, there are a number of reasons why we don't take live questions this evening, and we use the chat bar, and some of you may experience technical difficulties which we can raise with our team. Also, the questions will help us to understand key issues that people have got in taking forward into our further events as well, and help us strengthen the feedback that we provide within our proposals and future engagement activity, including our online community hub. So there are opportunities via the community hub on the website to engage and provide feedback. As I said, we're likely to take most of the hour for this session, but if we don't, then there will be an opportunity at the end for hopefully a few Q&As via the chat bar. Previous events and webinars that we've held are all recorded, and they are available on YouTube, or they're available on the East West Rail website. So there are opportunities for people to play them back and listen to previous answers should they wish to do so. So, like I said, the session is not about individual questions tonight. It's about themes and feedback on consultation themes and questions that we've received to date as part of the feedback session, and would encourage you, if you've got those individual questions, to go to the live chat events. So what we're going to cover today, just recap what we're consulting on. Your questions answered, as I said, that have come in over the previous period, how to get involved, and then what happens next. Next slide. So just to be clear, we're consulting on East West Rail, which is the route shown on that diagram there. It goes all the way from Oxford in the west all the way across to Cambridge. It's the first time we've consulted on the whole route. So with that, I will hand you over to Maria Cliff, who's the head of operations, who will talk to you a little bit about operations and customer experience. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and good evening, everybody. My name is Maria Cliff, and as John said, I'm head of operations for East West Railway. So I'm just going to very quickly take you through the 2 main areas that we're consulting on as part of this non-statutory consultation, and they are split into customer experience and railway operations, and then the infrastructure sections, of which 6 are included, and tonight we're focusing on the Bedford section of that infrastructure. So in terms of customer experience and railway operations, what we really want to know from you is how we can better shape the end-to-end journey for our future customers. So we're looking at right the way through from when you plan your journey to post-journey needs, from the train service, so which stations we call at, the number of train services that we offer per hour, how you want to travel on our trains, what you'll use the trains for. Will it be for leisure purposes, to see family and friends, or to commute to work? Also, where you want to interact with colleagues, and how you want that interaction to be, and the information that we provide to you along every part of your journey. So we've asked a number of questions in the documentation, and we really want to make sure that we capture everybody's feedback so that my team and I can build your thoughts and your views into how we continue to develop the service that this railway will offer. In terms of the infrastructure on the map that should be coming onto screen any second, we've split it into 6 sections. So today we're focusing on section C there, the red section, and if you've got any specific questions on Bedford, or please come to our live chat events, as John said. But ultimately, in the technical report and the associated documents, there's much more detail on Bedford. So I'll hand back now to John to go through some of your questions that you've posed to us so far in the live webinars and via our website.
Okay, thanks, Maria. So we're going to get into the technical detail. Section C, which is Bedford, which we're going to cover this evening, and I'm going to bring in Stephen Barker to talk to you in a bit more detail about Bedford and the associated areas. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. So as previously described, I'm Stephen Barker. I'm the development manager covering the section of our route from Oxford through to Bedford. So tonight we're particularly talking about Bedford and the Bedford area. The works we're doing in the Bedford area broadly split down into 3 distinct packages of work. The first of these is the Bedford St John's area around Bedford St John's station, and in this part of the on this part of the route, we're looking at realigning the railway there, putting it onto a slightly different alignment to the present one, and adding a second track. The section of railway through Bedford St John's only has 1 track at present. We would be putting a second track in there. In the realigning of the railway, we would be moving the railway away from the current station site at Bedford St John's. So we need to consider options for where we would place Bedford St John's on the new railway alignment. And we've considered 2 locations for that as part of this piece of work. Moving on to Bedford Station itself and the area immediately to the south of the station, we're looking at building some new tracks coming into Bedford from the south and into some new platforms at Bedford Station. This would require the existing station to be demolished, the existing station buildings to be demolished. And so we're looking at providing a new station building at the site at Bedford with new and enhanced facilities to deal with the additional train services that would be serving that station. And in particular, we'd be looking at adding additional platforms to the station on the east side of the current station site. Then moving on beyond Bedford Station to the north, this is where we're proposing to build 2 new tracks between Bromham Road Bridge and Clapham Green, and this creates the new connection on towards Cambridge. All of this material is covered in the consultation document in section C. Can we have the next slide, please? So as we've already said, tonight we're going to try and focus on questions that we've been asked so far in the consultation. We've seen a number of emerging themes coming through in the consultation so far, and we've tried to group those together to try and cover off as many of those questions as we can grouped under those general themes and issues that we've heard from so far, and in particular from the first webinar session that we held. So first of all, we're going to look at some questions that we've had around route options and the route alignment that we've chosen. So here are 4 questions, or 4 general questions that we've heard about. So the first one: why are you not reconsidering going south of Bedford along the old Varsity line, at least until you get clear of Bedford? A new station should be built at the site of the original St John's station with a tram link into Bedford Midland. So this covers a number of questions that we've had on a very similar theme. Quite a few people have raised the question of why aren't we going to the south of Bedford? The answer for that can be found in our previous consultation. In 2019, we held a consultation around route options between Bedford and Cambridge. That covered a number of route options, 5 in total, which were a short list from a much broader range of options that we'd considered previously. Of those options, 3 of the options did go to the south of Bedford, but the responses we had to that consultation indicated a general preference for East West Rail to serve the existing town centre station in Bedford rather than a new station to the south. And if you want to see the information from that consultation, all of that material is still available on our website, and that's there to be viewed if you wish to do that. There were also some general themes about why people wanted us to go to the town centre. There were some particular concerns around the convenience of the station located to the south of the station, particularly for people coming into Bedford to visit the town. And also we were faced with some questions around the connectivity with services on the Midland main line, the line that runs from London St Pancras up to the Midlands, and the ability to interchange with services on that line and Thameslink services to places such as Luton Airport and so on. In addition to that, one of our aims is to promote regeneration and growth along the route that we serve. And by serving the existing Bedford station, we believe we have the best opportunity to enable growth and regeneration within Bedford, to enable Bedford to play a really important part in the growth of the whole of the Bedford to Oxford arc. So that was the questions around the route to the south. Picking specifically on the question about the old Varsity line, the route that the railway originally took between Bedford and Cambridge. In particular, this would have been in some respects the worst of both worlds. It would have placed the station in Bedford in an inconvenient location that wasn't providing access to the interchange facilities at the existing station. And also there are some real challenges heading east out of Bedford along the former railway line. We would have had to have taken some land from some business premises along there, but more importantly, some of the old route is now forms part of a country park. And there are some significant environmental issues along that corridor where, since the railway has been disused for a number of years, obviously wildlife has moved into that corridor. The other big issue on the old corridor as well was flood risk. The previous route out through the Bedford St John's, the old Bedford St John's station, and out towards Cambridge to the east, is far more prone to flooding than any of the other options we looked at, and this would have created some real difficulties in trying to create a reliable railway line in a way that wouldn't have made the flooding impact on other properties in the area worse. Moving on to the next question then, it says here, all the other towns on the route appear to have a parkway station. Why has this been discounted for Bedford? I think the thing to say here, first of all, is not all of the other stations on the route do have a parkway station. We know there is a successful parkway station at Oxford, but the railway does also serve the city centre station in Oxford as well. We really thought it was important to serve the town centre in Bedford rather than have a station out on the outskirts of town, which was going to be less convenient for many people. That does bring us on to the next question. It says, bearing in mind that roads around the station are gridlocked and busy at times, and you're expecting more passengers, how do you plan to ensure the general Bedford traffic isn't detrimentally impacted more than it already is by an increased volume of traffic? So the thing to say here is it's relatively early days on this. We're working with Bedford Borough Council looking at the traffic impacts of the scheme. But one thing to be completely clear on is we are going to be placing a big emphasis on how we can facilitate more sustainable travel to and from the station, reducing the reliance on car traffic. And it's also worth noting that in section B of our consultation material, there are proposals for the stations on the Marston Vale line between Bletchley and Bedford, and some proposals there to potentially improve the stations on that route. One of the concepts provides a new station between Stuart B and Kempston Hardwick, which would actually reduce the need for some people, particularly from the west side, to travel into Bedford to access the railway. In the next question, it says, why are you following a traffic corridor with the new A428 at the Cambridge end, but not following a traffic corridor south out of Bedford with the A421? So again, this is another good question. We've received a lot of questions about this during the consultation so far. As we've already said, we looked at a number of route options, and a route broadly following the A421 was very similar to one of the options we looked at. As I've already mentioned, this didn't perform so well when we assessed this against the assessment factors that we've used to choose between options, and it had all the problems I've already mentioned about being less convenient for accessing the town centre and less able to facilitate growth. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So now we have a series of questions around some of the design proposals. So the first one, this is in relation to the Bedford St John's area. It says here, is it proposed to realign and double the St John's Chord line at Bedford in addition to relocating Bedford St John's station? So the works we're planning to do in the Bedford St John's area, as I've already described, involve realigning the railway. This is so that we can achieve a higher speed over this section of railway. The current railway is very, very tightly curved as it approaches Bedford through St John's, and as a result, trains are limited to travelling at just 15 miles an hour through that section of the line. In order to speed trains up a little bit through that area, we've looked at 2 potential alignments for the railway through there. As I've already said, we'd be looking to add a second track to that piece of railway. This would enable there to be enough capacity for the East West Rail services to be operated. Currently, there is just a single track on that section of railway, and that just doesn't provide adequate capacity for the future level of train service that we propose to operate. And yes, as already mentioned, with the railway itself being realigned, it's necessary to relocate Bedford St John's station itself. And we've got 2 potential locations that we're looking at for the relocation of the station. It has to be said that they're not that far away from the existing station, but they do involve moving the station slightly. On to Bedford Station. In 2010, Network Rail produced plans for a similar rebuild of Bedford Station that didn't require demolitions of non-railway property. Why are you not working on a similar basis? So a very good question. We've looked at the 2010 work that Network Rail produced. I think it's fair to say that the scheme that Network Rail were considering was a very different scheme to what we're now talking about. The Network Rail proposals did not take into account East West Rail at that time. At that time, East West Rail was still not confirmed as moving forward. And Network Rail did not take account of providing capacity for East West Rail to come through Bedford. Our plans at Bedford involve providing 3 additional platforms on the east side of the station, and as a result, they're very, very different to what was originally proposed back in 2010. And so we're having to look at the station again and consider how we make the station fit for the future with East West Rail as part of the picture. The next question, again, I think in particular in relation to Bedford Station, has there been any feasibility study for the disruption to Bedford while houses are being knocked down and a new station being built? We're at a really early stage in the design process at the moment, and we haven't gone into detail of exactly how the railway will be constructed and how the works will be carried out in and around Bedford. But having said that, we are acutely aware that wherever major construction work has to be undertaken, we have the potential to cause disruption, and of course we will be looking at how we minimise that disruption as far as we possibly can. We're particularly aware that in the town centre location there in Bedford, there is obviously greater scope to affect more people. We are already beginning to look at how we might construct the railway, and as I say, it's very early days, but as we move forward, we'll be developing more detailed plans for how we can do that whilst minimising disruption to neighbouring residents and to people in the town centre generally. Moving on to the area to the north of Bedford. The question here is, I do not understand the need to build 2 extra tracks within the built-up area north of Bedford. This will cause huge damage to the local community. Why can't the 2 extra tracks be introduced north of the urban community areas of Bedford and avoid this damage? So I think the first thing to say here is we are of course aware that our proposals have upset a number of people in the area. We completely understand that people have taken issue with this. We do not intend to acquire and demolish people's houses unless we absolutely have to, unless there's no reasonable alternative that we can adopt. The proposals that we've put forward are representing a reasonable worst case scenario. We thought this was important to do this rather than present an overly optimistic scenario at this stage and then have to come back subsequently and say that we require more properties than we actually do. We'll be looking in a lot of detail over the coming weeks, months and so on as we develop the designs for this area. And we will be working with Network Rail, who operate the existing railway through that area, to look at what we can possibly do to reduce the number of properties we affect through there. It is early days, but we'll be looking at this in a lot more detail. And I think it's fair to say this is one of our biggest areas of focus on the project, to make sure that we only take property where we absolutely have to here. To answer the point about why can't we just use the existing tracks and start the new railway to the north of Bedford, there are a number of reasons for this. Part of this is around our need to introduce a reliable train service. Our train service interfaces with existing railway operations at a number of points along the route, for example at Oxford, obviously at Cambridge at the other end of the route, but also we interface with Milton Keynes and the West Coast Main Line at Milton Keynes as well. There is a real possibility for our railway to become what you might term a super spreader of delay across the entire rail network. So for example, if something goes wrong in the Oxford area and one of our trains is delayed, the more trains it has to interface with on its journey to Cambridge, the more chance there is it will pass delays on to those other services. Also, we have to try and fit the trains in between all these other services as well, and the more trains we have to try and weave in and out of, the more the timetable becomes constrained, and we end up with trains having to wait in places to gain a path onwards along the route, and that increases the journey time and makes the service less attractive and less reliable to use. So again, we're aware that there's been a lot of correspondence around this recently and that it's been covered in the press. We're aware of the report that was commissioned by Bedford Borough Council, and we will be reviewing that in detail over the coming days and weeks to understand what's in that report, and we will be responding to that appropriately. However, I will say that if you look in our technical report that's been published as part of the consultation, there is a lot more detail about how we reached our conclusion that we require the extra pair of tracks to the north of Bedford. Right, can we move on to the next slide, please? And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jorn, who's going to talk about property impacts and questions in relation to land and property. Thanks, Jorn.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jörn Pace. I'm part of the land and property team at East West Rail. So one of the key roles of our team is to consult with the landowners who could be potentially affected by the scheme and keep them updated on the proposals. And we acknowledge that there are concerns in this regard. So we'll now go into some of the questions we've received during this consultation period. So the first question is, what about the properties not demolished that drop in value due to a rail being built on our doorstep? Well, firstly, our priority, as Stephen kind of pointed out, is to avoid our negative impact. And my colleagues will touch on this further with the steps we'll be taking during construction and our approach to the surrounding environment in order to mitigate impacts to the local community. But onto the support that's there for landowners. At the moment, we're consulting on the need to sell scheme. And this is for those who are going through hardship or who have a pressing need to sell, but are unable due to our proposals. And I'll answer some of the questions that have been coming in on this later in the webinar. But we really want to hear your views on the need to sell scheme and whether you think it's the right support for those who are potentially affected, and if not, you know, what you'd expect to see. But later down the project timeline, there are statutory provisions available for landowners, both those who are adjacent to the railway or on the line of the railway. And there's a leaflet on our website called Guide to Part 1 Claims, which is a form of compensation. So I recommend taking a look at that and getting in touch with one of our with our team at one of our live chat events. So moving on to the next question, are you looking to purchase any other houses, property in Bedford other than the Poets area? So I'm reading this question is, have we identified all the land and property that is required for the scheme? And in answer to that, so based on our current proposals to date, we've identified the properties that may potentially be required. And prior to the launch of this consultation, we wrote to those landowners to inform them of that. We're still at an early stage in our project, and as a result of that, the land and property requirements have not been finalised. But again, as Stephen's pointed out, we are committed to minimising our negative impact and not taking any unnecessary land. We will be able to provide more information on the land requirements by the next round of consultation. And I do go into more detail on some of the land and property elements later in this webinar. But in the meantime, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Maria, who will be answering some of the questions we've been receiving on freight. So over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much. So freight is a key theme that's been emerging across the route, I have to say, not just in relation to the section that we're covering tonight. And we've had lots of questions from local communities and local residents who would like more information from us on freight. So I wanted to start by providing a view on why freight could use East West Railway, and there are benefits to freight operation more widely across the network, and those include both the environmental benefits of modal shift, so taking lorries and containers off the road and using rail instead, and also the safety benefits from doing so. There's also, of course, the economic benefits of using rail freight instead of road freight. But I think it's also really important for me to say that we are trying to provide a balanced view on this in terms of the impact that it could have on local communities. So we've had a couple of questions which I'll cover now. And in terms of where we are with our freight development, there is a study ongoing at the moment, and predominantly we are a passenger service. That is absolutely the mandate given to us by the Department for Transport to improve public connectivity for local communities and across the arc between Oxford and Cambridge. So we are going to continue to accommodate existing freight on the route that exists today, the infrastructure that exists today. So that includes at the Oxford end of our route between Oxford and Bicester, also on the line between Bletchley and into Bedford, where currently there is freight that operates through Bedford in an 18-hour window, and also at the Cambridge end of the route there is existing freight today. So we will continue to accommodate the existing freight, but in terms of what the future could be for freight, my team at the moment is carrying out a timetable exercise to understand passenger services and how we operate those with a regular departure time for customers, and then the freight paths that could exist between those passenger services. But our main focus is on passenger services, as I said today. So let's have a look at the questions if we can, Caris. The first question was, is it a good idea to force freight through Bedford? So as I said, there is existing freight today that runs through Bedford. So the plans for East West Rail are not new to bring freight into the Bedford area. And secondly, will freight pass through Bedford Station, and can we set an upper limit on the number of paths? So that will be very dependent on the outcome of our passenger timetable study. And one of the things that we are also doing is talking to the freight operating companies and Network Rail to understand what the future plans could be for freight, and if our route would provide additional demand for freight. If we were able to provide paths between the passenger services, it doesn't necessarily mean that the demand would exist for freight operating companies to use those paths on our route today. The third question, how much freight will run per day from Bedford Station and Bromham Road Bridge towards eastwards? So the answer, I'm afraid, is that we don't know, but by the time that we get out to talk to you next at statutory consultation, we will be able to share absolutely the firm plans for freight and give you a lot more detail on what we intend to do with freight. But I'd also like to make the point that there are a number of things that we are considering in terms of noise mitigations and the way that the track is developed and aligned that could mitigate the impacts of freight on this railway. So I hope that's given a little bit more clarity, and we will be able to provide more information to you all at the statutory consultation stage once our freight strategy and our full timetable exercises have been concluded. Thank you. I'll hand back over.
Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Michael Shanks, I'm Head of Environment East West Rail. I really wanted to take an opportunity to respond to some of the important issues been coming through and the feedback we received so far as part of the consultation. But before I get on to the questions, I just really wanted to, I think it was worth noting that we do have a set of environmental principles that we're striving to deliver against, and there is more information on that approach on our website in our approach to environment fact sheet. So if you're interested in a bit more detail, there's a bit more in there in terms of approach we're taking. So turning to the questions. Thank you for the questions that have been coming in. They're really useful, give us some good insights into the views of the people who are going to be impacted by the railway. The first question that I wanted to address and pick up on, which has come through strongly, is around the visual impact of embankments and the potential for those to blight the countryside. So I think this is a really important area and an issue that we've heard really quite a lot about so far in the feedback. Now, with all of our proposals, the impact environment is actually really important. It's very much part of our decision-making process and is at the forefront of our minds. We continue to develop our design. And that really includes some of the possible mitigations that we'll put in place to prevent and reduce impacts. And those considerations cover all aspects of environment, but clearly also in the visual side of things. And we're continuing to review and develop our designs to ensure that the levels of embankments are no greater than necessary. So that work's ongoing and will continue. In terms of visual impact, looking after and caring for landscapes along the route is one of our core environmental principles I referred to earlier. And we're really carefully considering how what we build can be designed to blend in with your local environment. And there are a number of ways we can look to do this by, for example, utilising landscape earthworks to soften the appearance of embankments and to integrate them into the wider landscape context by using, for example, sensitive placement of appropriate planting, to either screen views from sensitive receptors or indeed to soften the appearance and presence of engineering work. So again, we're looking at all those options. In addition, we're also looking to ensure that landscape mitigation measures actually are closely integrated with the ecological requirements of both the project and the wider area. We're really keen to ensure that we bring the solutions together so that environment there's a really positive environmental legacy from the works that we're doing. So moving on to the second point, which is about reducing noise for the residents of Poets. Again, obviously really important, and we recognise the concerns about the impact of noise. And of course, I think it's worth saying that an important reason for the consultation is to identify areas where noise or visual impact is a concern to residents and the communities. And we're really committed to considering measures that will reduce noise and vibration, and there are a number of those that we'll consider. So, for example, the choice of trains may be important. Some trains are noisier than others, so we'll think carefully about the pros and cons of using particular types of train. Consideration of track technology is also important. The way we design and construct tracks can have an impact on noise and vibration. So this will be another area that we'll consider. And of course, there are other mitigations such as noise barriers that might be appropriate where our tracks are likely to create noise and vibrations. So there's a number of things we can look at to mitigate and indeed prevent noise to an extent. I think it's also just worth mentioning too that the solutions we come up with will actually be designed for specific locations. We'll consider the activities and potential noise impacts in specific locations and develop mitigations where necessary that meet the requirements of those locations. It's also important to note that, of course, we'll carry out comprehensive assessments of noise. And as part of that, we use, the latest approaches. We use industry-leading computer modelling, and through that we can incorporate key considerations such as local geology, for example, to help simulate potential noise and vibration impacts along the whole route. And that'll be part of our assessments. And we'll also look to consider what potential mitigations might be required. And of course, all part of a process we go through. All part of the environmental statement, and that's in the environmental statement is will be submitted as part of our DCO application to support that application for consent to build. So we need to clearly lay out what the likely environmental impacts are and include proposals for mitigation within that. Moving on to the final question here. Looking specifically at the area from Clapham and going above Brick Hill, these areas are going to be heavily impacted by this route. What has been done to protect the environment and countryside and peace and quiet in these specific areas? So again, another really good point, and it's really important to us that the urban and rural communities don't experience unnecessary disruption as we plan and then build and finally operate East West Rail. And a minute ago, I talked about how we'll undertake some specific local assessments around issues such as noise. I just really want to reiterate that we'll continue to consider the impact of planned works as the project progresses, and how that work may affect communities. And we'll talk to communities and their representatives to ensure that people who are impacted by the work are kept up to date with the activity and have an ability to engage with us on that. And of course, our assessments across all aspects of environment, and we are considering all aspects of environment, will be part of the environmental impact assessment process. The findings, as we understand them at the time, will be reported in the next consultation in the form of a preliminary environmental information report. And then there'll be a full environmental impact assessment, which is reported ultimately in an environmental statement that gets submitted with our DCO application. And that information and those reports will identify the environmental impacts and associated mitigations to reduce those impacts. So I hope that was helpful to an extent to help address some of those really important questions that have come through. But on that, I think I will hand over to Jörn. I think it's going to cover some other points.
Thank you, Michael. So some other kind of pertinent information for landowners. So during this consultation period, we've been meeting with those landowners whose land could be potentially required for our proposals. And within these meetings, we've been able to explain the proposals further, the project timeframes, the statutory provisions which would be available to landowners, and the next steps. And through speaking to the landowners and the wider community, this feedback that we gain also helps us understand the land use and how we can keep our negative impact as minimal as possible. Moving on to the need to sell scheme, which I touched on earlier, we thank those who have provided feedback on that to date, and to answer some of the questions which have been coming in on this. The purchase price would be for the unaffected market value of the property. There isn't a set distance in which the scheme would apply, and if introduced, it would be at the preferred route alignment announcement point, which is expected to be later this year. So, as mentioned before, we would really value your feedback on this. Please do get in touch. Let us know whether you think it's the right mitigation, and if not, what support you'd expect to see. I've mentioned we've got some leaflets on our website within a land and property focus section. And we have a team who can talk you through these, so do get in touch through our contact channels or attend one of our live chat events where you can talk directly with one of our experts. I think that's it for that slide, so I'll now pass back to Claire, who will discuss the consultation further.
Thanks very much, Jörn. And actually, we've actually got some time, I think, at this point to answer some questions. So can I hand over to you, Sian, and see which questions we will be able to answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Claire. Thanks
Brilliant,
so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So just to look at some of the questions we've had come through, and I think this is probably most relevant to my colleague John Hillman. But this week, Bedford Borough Council released a report that highlighted that a service can run on 4 tracks rather than 6. And the person who's asked this question would like to know whether we at East West Rail have read this report and whether we would consider this option. So, John, I hope that you might be able to answer that one.
Thanks. Yeah, certainly. So we are aware from the information that is out there that Bedford Borough Council have procured a consultant to look at the use of the tracks north of Bedford. We are not cited on that report or that outcome yet, although obviously there is some detail in the press around the findings. We expect that they will probably use that report in their response to the consultation, and therefore we will obviously get to see either their response that quotes that report, or they may well include that report in the response, and we will obviously then take their views and considerations into account as part of our consultation reviewed process. The other part is that the second part of the question, I believe, was to do with houses in connection to the 4 and 6 tracking and 50 houses being mentioned in respect of compulsory purchase. What I would say is we've got quite a lengthy section in the technical document between pages 266 and 297 that does go through all the reasoning behind how we've got to that, all the benefits, all the disbenefits, all the things we've looked at. And actually on page 277 does set out the likely effects on houses. Now, we do say the likely effects because at this stage, as Stephen talked about earlier, we are at a very early stage in the process of understanding exactly what the design needs to be, and therefore the parameters that we need to set. So there is a lot more information in the technical document that would help people to understand where we've got to in our thinking around that. Thanks, Sean.
Great, thanks very much, John. And another question we had come in was just regarding the impacts of COVID on passenger numbers, and someone asked whether East West Rail will be revisiting projected passenger numbers and so projected revenue and cost benefit analysis in light of changed working patterns that are likely to continue even after the pandemic restrictions have been lifted. We do have a fact sheet on COVID, and what I'll do is I'll just pop a link to that fact sheet within the Q&A of this chat so that you can find more answers around that topic there. So moving on, we had another question which was regarding Route E and the viaduct. Somebody mentioned that there was serious flooding of properties and the main road in Clapham at Christmas just gone in 2020, and has East West Rail done a flood risk assessment on the impact of building a railway viaduct across the floodplain between Clapham and Bedford? They also wanted to know whether we've taken into account that Bedford to Clapham viaduct crosses the path of major water pipes from the waterworks and the national grid line and pylons. So that was covered yesterday in a similar webinar that we had for Section D, and will be covered again in a Section D webinar on Monday the 17th of May. And both of those will be available on our website as well as recordings if you can't visit them. And I think my colleague Michael Shanks as well might have a little bit more information around the flooding aspect of that question, which he's happy to answer now for you.
Yeah, sure. So just quickly on flooding, an important issue, we're developing our resilience and mitigating flood risk by looking at project-related risks linked to climate change, and considering how changes to climatic conditions may affect the design of the project. So that's work that's ongoing at the moment. We'll also look to incorporate uplifts to take account of changing climate in our flood risk assessments, which we haven't done full flood risk assessments at this stage, but the work is ongoing in terms of considering flood risk. And as part of that, we've established and have ongoing regular engagement with the Environment Agency. And the purpose of that is to share our approach with them, to make sure they're comfortable with it, but also to share information, to share data, and to share modelling to support our work in terms of flood risk assessment. So brief update on that. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And just a quick question on electrification, which I believe Maria is probably best placed to answer. It's just, can East West Rail continue to pursue a plan for a non-electrified line, given the requirements for towns along the line, as well as the UK as a whole, needing to be carbon neutral in the next 20 years? So Maria, if you're happy to answer that one, that'd be great, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. And yes, so there is a 2040 government mandate that diesel-only trains be removed from the network, and that is absolutely something that we are committed to. So on our line, we are going to have an interim set of trains. And that is for our connection stage 1. And the reason for that is that allows us to get our train service up and running as soon as possible for the local communities and future customers. But what it also does is protects our position and allows us to explore alternative technologies for the route. So there could be a hybrid version of trains that we may wish to operate. But as of today, there's no firm decision been taken yet for East West Rail to be electrified. And it's something that we are in discussions with government on. But for our long-term fleet of trains, we are committed to that 2040 target, and we're absolutely committed to understanding whether there could be a hybrid fleet of trains or an alternative where there is overhead lines. But we understand that there's visual impacts there for local communities. But we are taking a thorough look at all of our options and making sure that we explore alternative technologies, but also mitigate all of the impacts of that electrification could bring if that decision is made for our railway. Thanks, Sean.
Great, thanks very much, Maria. And just sort of starting to wrap up on questions now. Just a quick one for my colleague John Hillman, really. I wasn't sure if there was anything more you wanted to say on the BCC report with regards to 6 tracking at all, just in relation to the question on that. If there was anything further you wanted to add. Well, I think either we're having technical difficulties.
So sorry.
Oh, brilliant.
Unmute myself. Apologies. So, as I said earlier, with regard to the 6 tracking, there is a report that we're aware of that's been produced that I'm assuming will form or be part of Bedfordshire Council's response to the consultation, but we'll wait to see, and we will respond accordingly when we receive their feedback at the end of this consultation.
Great, thank you very much for clearing that up, John. That's really useful. And Claire, back to you now. I think that's covered the questions that have been asked this evening. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sian, and thank you for those answers. And I hope those answers will be of help to you. And I'm just going to wrap up our session this evening with just, I guess it's almost a bit like a call to action to tell you all the different ways you can get involved. To say that we'd love to see you face to face, but because we can't at the moment, please go to our website and visit our consultation rooms, which have got lots of fantastic information if you haven't already done so. As we've mentioned already, the real way to ask us a question is through live chat events, because our experts will be lined up and they'll be able to have a conversation with you, a dialogue. So although it will be through the computer, you will be able to speak with one of our project teams. So we've got 10 live chat events between now and the end of the consultation, which will be on the 9th of June, between 2 and 3 a week. So please go to the website and see the joining instructions, and we'd be pleased to see you and talk with you, chat with you. We also have a dedicated phone line, because we know that not everybody is online or even comfortable in a digital space. So if you have a neighbour or someone else in your community who isn't online or doesn't feel comfortable going online, please do take a note of our telephone number and please share that with them, because we want to make sure that we get as many people responding to the consultation and asking us questions, so you're as informed as you can be for your consultation responses. And as I mentioned earlier, the consultation finishes on the 9th of June, so please get your feedback form back to us by then. Next slide, please. So there are different ways in which you can respond to the consultation. So as I just mentioned, you can send your feedback form to us via email at consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk, or if you prefer, please post it to us using our free post address. If you'd like a paper copy of the form to be sent to you, please email us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk or by calling us on our number there. Also, if you aren't aware that you actually can order hard copies of all the consultation documents off our website. And next slide, please. So what's next? Next slide, please. Well, please do stay in touch. We are here to answer your questions, to point you in the direction to more information. As Sian was saying, we've got a whole range of fact sheets on our website, one on COVID, one on the environment, one on freight. So please go and look at those fact sheets. And if you've got any questions, please do email us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Or please pick up the phone and call us. And we look forward to hearing from you. And I just want to say thank you all very much for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you again, either at another webinar or at our live chat event. And just wishing you a good rest of your evening as well. And I will say goodbye now from myself and the rest of the team. And thank you very much.